set of eyes that's going to approach the problem from a different perspective. And that imagination and that unique approach is going to help your internal team get a different view. The challenge, of course, is going back to that resource limitation is they are by definition going to be snapshots. If I get an assessment that's once a year, the report and the insight that I get from that assessment is going to be based on whatever number of unknown variables indicated that result based on the constraint that that test was able to be conducted. So some other pieces that I wanted to get into is there's also been a lot of debate in industry about emulation versus simulation. So Tim Malcolm-Vetter, who is the enterprise red team lead at Fortune 1, talks about emulation versus simulation. So emulation being a specific production, whereas simulation is an imitation. And the phrase that he ended up coming up with to describe red teaming was more along what we see in the intelligence community of false flag operations, AKA where an adversary tries to look like somebody else. I'm the Russians, I'm using Iranian malware, so you think it's the Iranians and not the Russians. He's offering that a red team should use that similar concept since that's what they're doing, since they're trying to look like somebody else. And of course, in our industry, nothing is without debate or contention. So the exact opposite definitions here by my good friend Katie Nichols, who's over at Red Canary. Whereas emulation is more in the spirit of versus matching an adversary directly, whereas simulation is an exact match. And the reason that this is important is that we have this challenge in our industry with the industry of breach and attack simulation, where simulation, attack simulation, has been given a particular definition as defined by Gartner and Forrester analysts. And so this is just something that is creating confusion. My personal perspective, I think when we're talking simulation, we are talking about the reproduction of something in a safe way in an environment, and emulation is where we are trying to specifically look at adversarial techniques, tactics, and procedures to pull those behaviors in. So the key elements to being able to conduct adversarial emulation are we need tools that are flexible and repeatable. They need to be customizable. We have to change the command and control. We have to change the way that this speaks. We have to change actions on objective. So another way to look at this is host activities need to be able to look different so that we're able to emulate those TTPs. And network activities need to be different because we need to emulate what's that fingerprint of what an attacker looks like. They should be repeatable. We want to be able to easily share this so that somebody else can use it. Like if the red team builds this, then the blue team is able to consume that and validate against that. We want to be able to easily run these over and over again so that we can start to get a benchmark for our performance and see where controls continue to get better or where there was a change and a control degraded. And then finally, going back to the purple team idea, we want to be able to get kill chain insight. Adversaries, malware, is not monolithic. There is no APT on this planet that lands with all of the code all at once. They do it in stages. Something small and innocuous lands, feels safe, and then starts pulling down bigger and better things. And then as it moves through your enterprise, because no adversary lands where they want to land immediately, they get that call back from your domain and they're like, okay, where am I? I'm on Joe's computer. Turns out Joe doesn't have anything I care about. How do I get from Joe over to Roy and Jill who do have something interesting? And how do I iterate my way from here to there through internal reconnaissance, lateral movement, credential theft, and ultimately accomplishing my goals? Being able to split the campaign into that depth from stage 0 to stage 1 to additional actions, we want to be able to see that insight. So another industry concept is the white box versus the white box versus black box testing. White box, you as the emulated adversary, you know everything. Black box, you don't know anything. Start from scratch, figure it out. Personally, I believe that white box testing is, for the most part, the best way to go. Again, going back to we have constrained resources. We can assume that our adversary, in time, through all of the many resources and interests that they have, depending on your threat model, will get the information they need to conduct an intelligent, iterative campaign. So again, in terms of emulating the adversary, the Whitebox approach automatically gives them that level of knowledge, which we can assume they will get. So it's, again, another example of how I can cheat and emulate an adversary without having to invest the time and the resources to do it. Defense validation. So the concept of defense validation is the red team is attempting to emulate a behavior. And this is an important concept. We want to be behaviorally focused. Being able to emulate any kind of ransomware, because there are going to be all sorts of different variables that are going to test and evade your controls in all sorts of different ways, is much more valuable than just saying, hey, I grabbed a sample of WannaCry from the environment, I reverse engineered it, I neutered it so it's safe, and we can run that in our organization. The only thing you're going to learn from that is your signature IOCs for that WannaCry payload, and specifically what that payload does. So your red team, you want to be able to be creative and flexible. If today I can be an APT, tomorrow I can be an insider threat, and I can be any one of those things in a lot of different ways. From the blue team side, we're looking at controls validation. So is my firewall still blocking that? Is my SIM logging this? Vendor validation. Am I able to monitor that something is being exfiltrated to DNS? The ability to validate that all of this defense in depth that I've built up through numerous controls and products, because spoiler alert, we buy a lot of products that sit on a shelf because they don't get used. And a lot of the reason that they don't get used is because we're not getting what they need to do to work. And the ones that we have implemented aren't optimized to get to do what we work. So that's the defense validation from the blue team side. And then finally, of course, is the executive perspective. Hey, we're spending a lot of money. We're spending money on people and products. What are we getting? Where is their value to us versus, oh man, that snake oil got us. So you want to be able to validate these investments. And a great example is a managed service security provider. What am I getting? Are they still awake? What's my ability to run something through the environment and validate, are they going to catch that? Why didn't they catch that? What's the missing element of being able to break that problem apart? So threat intelligence. So threat intelligence today, I would argue, is in the trough of disillusionment. We went from, wow, sexy dark web scanning is the greatest thing ever, to, well, what do we actually get for it? And there's several problems. First of all is the emphasis on static identifiers. It leads to disappointing because, of course, adversaries have already built change and entropy into their campaigns. I'm not going to continue to go to the same domain over and over again. I'm going to build it in so that every 24 hours, my malware automatically goes to a new domain. Because once you've blocked out one, I still have malware that can be active and can still get past that kind of control. The other challenge we have is that threat intelligence, for the most part, can be very generic. Okay, you've discovered that that's happening over there. Does that mean it's a threat to me? How is it a threat to me? And so where there's really rich intelligence data, of course, is in the analyst reports. And analysts write some fantastic reports. The problem is they're 40 to 60 pages long. And that means you have to read them. And then after you read them and parse through all of that information, you then have to figure out, how do I take that information and consume that into my environment to easily be able to take advantage of that threat intelligence? One thing that's been created, and I should have put it in this slide, was released last year in October, is a natural language processing platform called Tram. It's built by Mitre. And what it does is it combs through analyst reports and automatically tries to template them into the Mitre Attack framework, which we'll be discussing shortly. So you can't talk about threat intelligence without referencing David Bianco's Pyramid of Pain. This is the framework for understanding how easy is it to take what we are trying to replicate and emulate and bring that into our environment. And so this pretty much is a different way to discuss what I just said. Anything from hashes to domains, fairly easy to do, and that's a lot of what we see. Specific artifacts starts to get more challenging. And then that very top piece of my ability to emulate specific tools and TTPs That's difficult. And part of why that's difficult is that today's threat intelligence industry is challenged with coming up with ways to make that easy to consume. So this is, again, another shout out to Katie Nichols. This is a derivative of an idea she had. And this is fundamentally what the Tram Project is going for, which is looking at a specific campaign description and automatically pulling out what are those Mitre Attack tags to that so that I can start to build campaigns from that for emulation. A more detailed example, this is something that was recently released by Microsoft. This is the Astaroth attack chain. They just published this a few days ago. Also just orienting the audience in all of the references and sources I have. I post the link in the bottom right. So anytime there's something where there's even more data information, it's accessible from the slide. So in this case, Astaroth, at a high level, it spearfishes with a URL. That URL pulls down a batch file that has a one-line call to JavaScript. That JavaScript uses some fancy on-host pieces to pull down an executable in 3 stages. And through a combination of DLL hijacking and process injection, it then replicates the entire stage of the executable. And at that point, goes and starts to steal. First thing it does is host enumeration. What security controls are on this host? Because as an adversary, I'm going to have already enumerated back in my lab all of your potential host security controls. Your antivirus, your EDR, I have those. I've reverse engineered them. I know how to blind you. I know how to disable. I know how to deceive. And so I just need to make sure that I know what I'm looking for on that host, and then that I'm going to act accordingly so you don't catch me. And then at this point, the campaign goes and starts stealing password and email credentials and sends those back home. So we can already see the phases at a high level for what we want to emulate for that adversary. And again, another example of the fact that an adversary is not monolithic. In this case, the adversary had 5 different stages of different pieces of code doing different things before it finally assembled itself into that full piece. And here's a great example of our ability as a red and a blue team to understand what controls are best optimized to be able to foil a campaign like this on the host or the network level. And at what point is that easiest for us to do that? Of course, everything's about Mitre Attack. I've referenced it several times already in this talk. And on top of that, they've come out with even more details in Mitre Attack. So the advantage to Mitre Attack is, first of all, it's a common language. When we're looking at adversarial emulation, we now have a periodic table of a number of elements that we can now have an easy conversation where everybody is on the same vernacular of red, blue, and the executive perspective of what we're talking about. It's a great meta layer for behavior because we've decoupled the technique from the specific technical components. And as I'll show here in the next slide, how to visualize the effectiveness of this, because it's a way to start to show what you've done and what's been effective over time. The problem, of course, is anytime we create something that is simple and great, we misuse it. And so where we get into is, again, if we lose that focus on what Mitre Attack behaviorally describes, we get really pigeonholed into looking at it as, these are a bunch of boxes I need to check, and I did these specific commands that validated these boxes, and I'm done. The way I like to think about it is, going back to that periodic table metaphor, is Mitre Attack is a great way for me to go, okay, I don't just want to test for hydrogen, and I don't just want to test for 2 parts of oxygen. I want to test for water because it's state-based. My ability to do lateral movement is going to depend on what credentials I've stolen. Those 2 things link together. And so it's a way to describe a chemical equation. Don't just focus on the elements itself. So open source option, this is something that a number of us, and I'll give the biggest credit to George Ortiz, who's an instructor at SANS, we came up with about 7 months ago, this idea that there are a number of offensive security tools, open source and commercial, that are available. In fact, when we started this, there were about 20, and almost every single week, a new one would be identified or would be created from the open source community. So there's a lot of great research that's being done here. The challenge is it's very hard to stay abreast of all of them. Some of them are very difficult to use. And so what we did is we created this C2 matrix, which is effectively a compendium and a decision tool to help you decide what's the best tool for me to try to emulate the adversary that I'm trying to emulate. It's driven by the community. So if you're interested, we're looking for folks to jump in and help evaluate specific tools. And we have a roadmap where we're going to continue to offer new things that come out of it, such as we just released a how to the C2 matrix. And what this provides is how to install and use every single tool that we've identified. Coming soon, we are going to be releasing from SANS the Slingshot C2 Matrix Edition, where 10 command and control frameworks are automatically built into it. So all of the installation and maintenance have already been done for you. We've also been working with the Kali Linux folks, so that 11 C2s will be included in there for you. And then we're going to start working in attack and adversary mapping in a future roadmap. And some of the other ideas we've had are automatically generating controls and detections from these tools, because the reality is that real attackers use open source tools, because if it works, why would I build and research something on my own when I can just use something else? So on behaviors, here's 4 different campaigns that we've seen going back to 2013. What do we notice? Well, first is they sure like HTTP. Most command and control exfiltration happens over plain text HTTP because it works. It's not hard. Second, the dwell time on most of these campaigns was around 300 days. Third, every single one of these effective campaigns is available on the criminal underground for around $50. They're cheap. I don't have to know what I'm doing, and they work. And they're still threats. So the behaviors we want to focus on for our emulation are the network space. This is a finite space. I, as an adversary, have to bend to the laws of physics the way that you do. At a higher application layer, I can be fun. At the physical layer, I become a 1 and 0 just like you do. I'm limited. As we discussed, communications are a finite space. In addition to that, I'm going to have to blend in with the behaviors. If a computer starts beaconing and doing a whole bunch of activity and sending a whole bunch of information out to the internet at 2 in the morning when office hours are only 9 to 5, that's a behavioral anomaly. That is a way that I can easily go, right? I didn't even have to be clever. I can see that that adversary sticks out like a sore thumb just based on the behaviors that they're emulating. And then infrastructure. The cloud is your friend and your enemy. We are now at this point where the cloud is everywhere and nowhere. At the end of the day, it's something that you need to pay attention to, because it's awful. It can be difficult to understand what kinds of network activities are happening on these points that are constantly spinning up and down and might be out of your purview. Lateral movement. Lateral movement is my ability to move through your organization from computer to computer, hopping my way from my initial access point to the point of interest. I'm going to use vulnerabilities. I'm going to use credentials. I'm going to spray passwords and see what works, and I'm going to work my way through. Lateral movement, though, is a combination of network and host activities. I need a computer inside your enterprise to actually run the commands to initiate the traffic that is going to allow me to move through the organization. And so things that we need to be looking at is, first of all, things like segmentation control. Should these computers be talking to each other? Should these be on the same network? Host activities. What kinds of things am I, as an attacker, going to do on an objective? Destruction. Building things. Modifying things. This is why backups are so important, but are your backups safe? Have you done your backups? Escalation. Escalation can happen through engineering and then the concept of vulnerabilities. 0 days are ones that nobody knows about and there's no patch. N days we've been notified are the patches installed and preventing it. Persistences. What kinds of services or my ability to work in user space to allow me as an attacker to continue to survive a user rebooting, a user patching, a user reinstalling. And then of course, the all popular, what kinds of user credentials can I steal? Because not only does that give me access, I'm now given the sock puppet to look like somebody else. When I use your credentials, you inherently think it's that employee versus you thinking it's me. So pick a course, Captain. Here we go. This is loading slowly. There we go. Okay. So one other tool for this, and I mentioned this a few slides ago, is the Mitre Navigator. Mitre Navigator allows you to go through and build up a campaign, and it automatically has everything linked together. So when we're looking at what kind of exercise, what kind of adversary we want to emulate, bounding it into the Mitre Attack framework is really easy with their Attack Navigator tool to just select and then pick the pieces that you want to do, and then it'll walk you through on how to do that. So finally, with about a minute left here, toward a purple team, the advantage of going purple is you're formalizing the red and blue joint goal of securing the organization. There is now this structure around engagements of identifying the intervals and durations like we talked about. Think of it as an extended red team, except for we break it up with milestones, and then identifying the rules of engagement for what is allowed to be done. The challenge, of course, is this is still a new concept, and bureaucracy is hard, organizational change is hard. So there'll be the need to formalize with sponsorship what we're going to do. Scheduling it is now going to be more difficult because it's not as simple as, okay, red team, just go away and do something. And typically red teams are small. Now we're looking at multiple stakeholders being involved in this engagement. And then there's cultural change here. We're very used to the red versus blue dynamic, and the red and blue dynamic can be a difficult one. So an actual purple team exercise that was recently conducted at a large financial institution emphasized it's all about the TTPs, test and report the good and the bad, running high value, they definitely got high value out of it. And then just a call out to Zena Olson, she's going to be presenting a talk at ThoughtCon going in even more detail on this. For those of you who want some more, my friend George Orchias runs a SANS SEC 564 class, and that's it. I will be jumping over to the other Zoom for questions and answers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bryson. It was great to have you on, and appreciate you taking some time and sharing all the cool stuff that you guys are working on and your perspective here on adversarial simulation.
Thanks, man.
All right. So on the next docket here, we have, let's see, apologies. There we go, illuminating